So we got another legend member segment today. Mammon, who many of you guys were actually a fan of in the comment, he is a guy who really appreciates his 1960s NBA history. And today we got like a special episode today where it's going to be a little bit longer. I mean, I'm not sure what the final time is, but you guys know. Looking down, we're going to be talking about the 60s Celtics and looking at various different angles from that team. I mean, probably the most. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. They're one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, but unfortunately, when you play pre 1980s, you just don't get much shine, much attention. A lot of the context is missed there. And so hopefully that's something we can shine a light upon and have a good conversation. And so, Mammon, let me know what you'd like to get started with related to the 60 Celtics today.
Yeah, I think we should just introduce the Celtics dynasty as a whole because just as you said, this is a very prominent portion of NBA history,
100%.
and it's just not regarded or talked about in the same light as we have, the Bird Celtics, the Magic Lakers, the MJ Bulls, which, people are going to cater to whatever portion of NBA history that they most enjoy. And in that sense, you kind of get into the discussion of what's the best product that we're giving the
Sure.
fans. So to some extent, this conversation is about, products and how much viewership there is. But even though this 60s period was before the NBA truly became the big product that it was with the boom of Magic and Bird, in their big college game that was getting marketed in the draft like, oh, they're going to be rivals going into the NBA. And then we
Right.
just saw what happened in the 80s. Even though it wasn't that, there's still not only so many stories to tell regarding this dynasty, but I mean, just to get it out of the way, 11 championships in 13 years. When you talk about the not only longest sustaining dynasties in NBA history, but just also like the most significant, especially for one franchise, because
Mm-hmm.
you think about the Celtics, they have 18 titles. 11 of those were quarterbacked by the player that we will get into, Bill Russell, and then obviously the teammates of his that we will also touch into.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting conversation because obviously, I being a Lakers fan, I would love to say that we're the most successful, franchise in basketball history, but the reason we're not technically that is because of the Celtics in this specific era, just absolutely dominating 8 straight championships. They won 11, but interestingly enough, Bill Russell was very close to winning 12, but there was obviously the injury that he had early on in the NBA finals and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, this will be really, really fun to get into. And so, you want to start with just kind of focusing on Russell and kind of his journey a little bit. Is that kind of how you're looking at it?
I think that's just the natural place to start, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
when you're talking about this, late 50s to throughout the 60s Celtics dynasty, when you're trying to find the common denominator for the success of this franchise. I mean, Red Auerbach was with them for a while, but he left the team, and then Kuzi was with them for the first segment. Then you kind of got Hondo, but the only, part of this team throughout all those years was Bill Russell.
Yeah.
And he ultimately, I mean, when you talk about just a winner, right? And one of the
Mm-hmm.
greatest players this game has ever seen, if not the greatest. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments you can make for multiple different players. It's Bill Russell. And Bill Russell, we talk about his defense. And we talk about his rebounding. I mean, the gaudy rebounding numbers, like in Game 7 of the 1962 NBA Finals, when he put up I repeat, 40 rebounds, and it was just ridiculous, just what he was able to do when, the moment truly, it really mattered. And we talk about those things. Those are kind of when we think about Bill Russell, we think about the defense. And if you've seen the highlights, like the chase down blocks and the whatnot. But something that I feel like doesn't always get talked about, especially in modern circles with Bill Russell, is he was kind of an innovative offensive player. The fast break. I mean, just thinking about what they did to kick that off with the outlet pass, Bill Russell getting the rebound. They always talked about throughout many of the Celtics documentaries that exist out there, whether it be on Netflix or Max. Um, it all started, it was all a possession game, right? It's all about controlling that possession, getting Bill Russell to not only get the rebound, which is one of the best ever at doing, but then the way, I mean, I would argue it, it might be him, Wes Unseld, Walton Jokic, when it comes to just getting that ball and then kicking off the outlet pass over, early on it was with Bob Cousy, but that was kind of the whole system. It was him getting the ball and kicking off. He initiates the beginning of that offense to where Cousy can kind of work his magic and dish it off, to whatever player, whether it's like Heinsohn or getting a shot open for Sam Jones. But that all started with Russell. We look at Russell's efficiency numbers now in today's kind of like analytics day and age, and we're like, well, how could he have been a good offensive player if he was shooting, in the low 40%? And even a strong Bill Russell fan can tell you that he wasn't necessarily the most gifted scorer of all time. And that's just, you don't have to look on a basketball reference page to understand that. You can just watch, the tape.
Sure.
But he was absolutely a massive part of that offense, from kicking off the outlet pass over to the fast break. Yep. Or if you watch a lot of after Bob Cousy retired, a lot of those offensive sets that they would run started with a guard bringing it up and kicking it over to Bill Russell near the free throw line, where he would either dish it off and just, continue the play, or, he would set screens and get people open, especially Sam Jones, because a lot of, especially kind of around like 64, 65, when Sam Jones was truly peaking, they would run the whole thing where he would get the ball to the person who would eventually get it to Sam Jones and get that open shot. And that was extremely successful. I mean, they weren't necessarily the top offensive team in the league. They definitely kind of focused on getting the stop and then pushing the fast break and getting points, just kind of like, it's almost kind of funny. It's like we usually say quality over quantity, but in the decade of the 60s, it really was, to some extent, quantity over quality. It was outpacing the opponent. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel just with Bill Russell in general. Is we talk about the defense and rebounding, but his offensive game, I mean, he was really successful in that end.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's certain misconceptions and ways people look at Bill Russell. Like you said, we both agree he wasn't like the most gifted like scorer, but I wouldn't say he was, by any means a bad, subpar, or even average offensive player. On offense, he was a great player, especially for that team. Like you said, getting a rebound, getting out in transition, doing a lot of like the orchestrating and quarterbacking from either the post or from the top of the key, and then setting those screens, for Sam Jones and giving him room to operate, that sort of thing. Very, very gifted passer. And I mean, he said it himself. The way he plays wins, because Wilt Chamberlain had his own way of looking at it, saying, well, I needed help. And, while Bill Russell was more along the lines of, well, I just know how to make the most of my teammates and how to make them better, and we've seen plenty of footage. I'll put some up on as I'm talking about it, but like him just taking it coast to coast as a 6'10" player who was legitimately one of the greatest leapers in the entire world. You've seen that clip where they showed on Inside the NBA where he's literally just clearly jumping right over a dude. And that's within like the 2%, less than 2% probably, of Bill Russell's career that we actually have on footage. Like, imagine all the crazy stuff, we haven't seen. I think part of what I appreciate about Bill Russell and what makes him special, and nobody ever really talks about this, he was kind of like the first maniacal, psychopathic competitor. When they talk about, that Mamba mentality with Kobe, or that willing to win at all cost Michael Jordan, as far as I can tell from NBA history, that truly started with Bill Russell, because there's stories about his teammates talking about the fact that he wanted to win so bad, he'd make himself so I'm not saying this is a great thing, but he'd make himself so anxious before games sometimes that he'd have to go throw up before a game started. He wanted to win that bad. There's another funny story where Wilt Chamberlain is given this massive contract. They give him a $100,000 contract. And because Bill Russell is so competitive. He was so frustrated to hear that Wilt Chamberlain is now the highest paid player in the NBA with his $100,000 contract. He then goes and renegotiates his contract to make $100,000, $100,001. And so he got $1 more than Wilt Chamberlain did just so he could be called the highest paid player in the NBA. And that's the stuff that, like, no wonder why he was so special. No wonder why he was 10-0 in Game 7s. No wonder why he won 11 NBA championships. And so, yeah, Bill Russell was special. And I think if you're going to say, like, because LeBron fans like to use this type of excuse, as just being like, well, if he wanted to be a 35 points per game scorer, he could. Now, is that true? I don't know. Maybe. Just choose to pass less and choose to shoot more and that sort of thing. I think that's even true to Bill Russell to a certain extent, is he just wasn't concerned about that. He had no problem with Sam Jones or John Havlicek or these other guys being the top scorers on the team, as long as the ball was flowing around, as long as there was plenty of movement and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, Bill Russell was really special. One last thing I want to touch on before I pass it back to you, though, is you talked about the GOAT conversation, and absolutely. If there's one guy, like Michael Jordan's my personal GOAT, but Bill Russell absolutely has his case for sure. And that's the funny thing, again, when we talk about, well, we have Michael Jordan over LeBron, and one of the reasons is because, 6 beats 4. And then they're like, well, 11 beats 6. But you don't have him as a GOAT candidate. Actually, we do. I do. I think that's a great argument. Sure, you could bring in the conversation that there was less teams in the 1960s, but Bill Russell made the point that just means the pool of talent is more condensed, and so things are even more competitive in that way. Brought up the point to Michael Jordan. John Paxson, who made that game-winning three-point shot in the 1993 NBA Finals, he couldn't have made that shot because he would have been up in the stands because of the talent's more concentrated. He's not going to be in that game. And so, yeah, Bill Russell was just awesome, man. And I think, the fact that he did win with different types of teams, like you said, starting his career with Bob Cousy, ending his career, in his mid-30s, alongside of a totally different supporting cast for the most part. To me, that just speaks to his greatness.
Yeah, I agree. I usually don't, put my own opinions in these segments, but I will just be, front out open. Bill Russell is my GOAT. So now, granted, I have like Bill Russell and Michael Jordan as my like 1 and 2, and they're like my GOAT tier. So I look at it more as tiers. So Those are my two guys that I just put like in a stratosphere above everybody else.
Sure.
It kind of reminded me, like when you did your video on the greatest players of all time, your recent video series on that. I don't know if you split it into 2 parts or just in one video, but I know that you were like giving all your reasons for why you thought every player was, at that spot that you put him at. And then you're like, well, number 1 is Michael Jordan. Anyway, guys. And you just like ended off the video.
Sure. I've also explained that. That was just comedic angle. I've explained it like probably like 7 times during the life of the channel. So I thought, we'll just play it off like a joke. But no, you could definitely make the arguments either way. And sorry, just to chime in, bringing up my list changed so much since the last time I did it. So it's like, do I take it as something serious in the sense that I care about it, I put thought to it, and I give my honest feedback on it? Sure. But also, I don't think it's so ridiculously clear-cut. When you're talking about the greatest of the greats, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And if I really wanted to make an argument for Bill Russell being at the top, I can make a pretty damn good one, And just because, like, you can't deny the resume, and there's reasons for that resume. But anyway, I'm not trying to steal your thunder. You can continue.
You're all good. Just to tag back on what you were saying about Bill Russell's game before, how specifically he differed from Wilt Chamberlain in the sense where, he was willing to give the ball to his, Sam Jones, Tom Heinsons, and all that, and have them be the scorers. Whereas, Wilt Chamberlain was kind of that guy where, like, I have my teammates with me, but I'm going to be this gaudy record-breaking, 50 points per game, 25 rebounds per game. Like, I'm going to be the guy that's talked about when we talk about the most dominant player. Sure. I've had a lot of thought about this, about what truly makes Bill Russell so great. And I find that it wasn't even that he was willing to give the ball to those people, which he absolutely was. It's that he realized that in the 5v5 sport of basketball, in a team concept, you have to give the ball to other people,
Sure.
because a lot of your other players' success, especially when it comes down to crunch time, is rhythm. Like, players need
Hmm.
to be in rhythm. If you give people those opportunities late in games to make those big shots, whether it be, I mean, I don't want to bring up Don Nelson because that might have been the luckiest shot of all
Sure.
time in the 1969 NBA Finals, but there are plenty other, especially with Sam Jones. Like, if Bill Russell's just going out there and trying to be the most dominant center, and he's trying to play the stats game with Wilt, which he said on multiple occasions that he realized that he can never play the numbers game with Wilt, because he's just never going to. I mean, let alone, I mean, he's probably not going to win that game, for one.
Yeah.
But also, is that what basketball's about? One person's stats,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because that's what he always said, is that the only stat that matters in basketball is winning or losing.
Sure.
And he truly, bought into that idea. So for him, it was very much, he came into the Celtics thinking that it was his responsibility. I actually just watched a bit of the amazing Netflix documentary, Bill Russell Legend. That
Hmm.
is just an absolute treasure trove for information. I mean, you can go, scouring on YouTube if you want, and just go through so many playlists. But if you want like one like designated like last dance type of documentary, I mean, I'm not marketing this out to the masses. I'm just giving my own opinion.
Hey, he's
That
your
they're
goat.
not
Do
paying me.
it. Yeah, he's your goat. Do it.
But he spoke about how when he got drafted by the Celtics, and then he played in the Olympics. He spoke about how he personally scouted out the Celtics and all their players and all the things that made them tick, what they were good at, the spots that they, succeeded in, because he realized that he needed to make them better. That was his duty. He needed to fit into what the Celtics had and do what he could to make them better. So he talks about it all the time with letting players do what they do best by taking the responsibilities of what he does, the rebounding, the defense, the kicking it out, the initiating the half court offense, a lot of the times from his spot over by the free throw line where he's, what we talked about.
Right.
He's letting other players, especially you can see this with Sam Jones, who is really good at finding his, they're kind of them running the sets for him and him finding his open shots, and he could knock them down, in my opinion, maybe just as good as anybody we have ever seen. Those things, he kind of realized that if he truly bought into the team concept and just decided that if he tried to play Wilt Chamberlain's game, he just wasn't going to win, because that's not how you win a team sport. You have to play as a team.
Sure.
He kind of realized that he could do what he did best and truly iron that out and do a lot of what the team needed, while letting other players have less responsibility, therefore really being able to iron out what they do best. And all of those kind of like specialists working as a unit can, achieve the final goal, which is winning. Which, if you want to, debate the, I'm not saying you specifically, but just in general, kind of like results speak for themselves. And if anybody can make that argument, or for any player, it's for Bill Russell.
For sure. Well, one of the things you didn't mention that really supports your argument is, again, let's take a look at Wilt Chamberlain. When did Wilt Chamberlain start winning? When he started playing the game more like Bill Russell, Like, he had talented teams. They went deep in the playoffs, and again, I'm not going to argue that they were as talented. They didn't have as many Hall of Famers. They weren't quite as deep as the Celtics. Sure. But they got to many opportunities, like 4 game sevens between Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, that were within like 4 points. Okay, so you're talking about just a couple plays here and there that could ultimately decide everything. And Bill Russell's also always coming away with the victories. But when Wilt won championship 1967 with the Philadelphia 76ers and eventually in 1972 with the Los Angeles Lakers, that's where he became less of a scorer, a guy who's more willing passer, orchestrating from the post or the free throw line, blocking shots, playing defense, letting Jerry West do more of the scoring, letting, other guys like Hal Greer do a little bit more of his thing. So yeah, I think in a way, like, even that part of Wilt Chamberlain's success supports the reasons why we view Bill Russell the way that it is. It kind of set up the foundation in a way of how we view, the greatest players of all time. And I've said this before, like now we view Michael Jordan as the standard. But Michael Jordan was fighting against the grain for a long time and was trying to prove that he could win his way. His way was different because in the 60s, it was Bill Russell was the winner. Wilt Chamberlain became a winner when he became more like Bill Russell. Then there's parity in the 70s, then you get the 80s, and it's the same thing all over again, where you've got team leaders, unselfish guys, ball movers. It's not Alex English leading the league in scoring or, other guys just pouring in buckets constantly like Dominique Wilkins. No, it's team leaders like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, passing guys winning the championships. And it wasn't until MJ came that it's like, oh, you can actually lead the league in scoring and win championships as well. And somehow that just became like the standard and what everybody wants. But for a while, these guys were genuinely defining the NBA. And so, I'm just glad you brought that up because I do think that's the biggest misconception about Bill Russell as an all-time great and why it's insane to me when people have him either outside their top 10 or the very edge of their top 10. Because for me, like he won 11 out of 12 trips to the NBA Finals. You're talking about second or third greatest rebounder in NBA history. I think the greatest defensive player of all time. And then just look at how he performed when it mattered the most, man. And on top of the fact that he was I think, not just the anchor of their defense, but as far as their offensive game as a whole, how their offense ran, I think he was the anchor of their offense as well. And so, yeah, there's definitely a case for him, for sure.
Well, and I think it's just like, I would argue that this should be common consensus, even amongst modern circles, just, objectively analyzing the game. But the biggest problem is that you have B-tier stars like Gilbert Arenas and JJ Redick who are going into the media. And I don't want to touch too much on this. I don't want to be dissing anybody. But these people are just going out, and a lot of it, even Stephen A to some extent. And I mean, they have their own opinions, and I want to give people the right to have their own opinion. But it's not even educated opinions. There's so
100%.
much misinformation. There's they played against 5'11" white guys as if this was like 1945 and not like the 1960s. Yep. And you know what, man? I think it's truly a travesty that this era of basketball, this truly amazing era of basketball, when you look into some of the things that happen, some of the storylines, has just kind of fallen to the wayside because we have this media consensus now that, and maybe not even a media consensus, like I feel like it's fabricated. Like there's a product that's being, kind of sold to the fans, and, you can't market an era where there was so little, we have so little footage as it is. We're so lucky to have the historians on YouTube now, especially in today's day of internet age, just, so much footage is being brought back and restored. And you're seeing, because that's a big thing, is a lot of people look at 60s basketball and they're thinking like, oh, this looks so much clunkier. A lot of that is just the film. Because, without it being restored film, a lot of it, it's just, you're not seeing it at the same quality that we can see. I mean, people take for granted just how good of recording technology we have now. And, especially like playing it live, like back then, a lot of the games weren't live. A lot of the games you were seeing after the fact. Not to mention that the NBA had to compete with far bigger sports leagues at the time, mainly, like the NFL, whatnot, which it still does, but nowhere near to the same extent that it was then.
But imagine Bill Russell like jumping over a dude in 4K, and we've got all these different angles, and we watched the game live, and we understood the context of the moment, and we got his thoughts on it. We got legendary stories from his teammates about it. You're right, just the wealth of information and footage and angles and that sort of thing. And again, that's within like the 1% to 2% of the footage we actually have of him. I've made this point before in a past video, but just imagine Michael Jordan if we only had 1% to 2% of his highlights and of his games on film. Like, you're talking about some of his most iconic moments. So like him dunking from the free throw line, maybe the most iconic image in NBA history outside of probably Wilt holding his 100. In all likelihood, that's gone now. You know, his switch hand layup in the NBA Finals, the 91 Finals, gone. You know, the shrug game, gone. You know, like how much will we have available? The iconography of Michael Jordan is completely changed now. And to be honest, that eye test aspects is a huge part of his legacy and his GOAT case, because people are like, I can see that he, to me, is the greatest player ever. You know, just look at how he glided through the air, that solid footwork, all that. Now you got 1 or 2%. That's the part that I feel like people miss when you're looking at the Wilt Chamberlains, the Bill Russells, but even beyond that, you know, Jerry West, Bob Pettit, Elgin Baylor. I could go on and on. But, you know, that's such a disadvantage to be operating from. But even with that being said, we still have stuff like Bill Russell jumping over a dude or things like that. It's like, it's amazing that within that limited window, there's still things to marvel at. And so I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, and like you say over and over again, with the Bill Russell jumping over a dude, I mean, for one, I'm pretty sure he still holds the high jump record at the University of San Francisco, even now.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
And he was top 10 in the world at that time. Granted, he was not training for the high jump. He was an Olympic level high jumper without training a lick, because you're supposed to train a very specific way for the high jump. He just said, because I think his story was that I remember that he kind of just, you know, they wanted him to do the high jump. He's like, you know, just screw it. I'm gonna just, you know, he's just going for side quests here. He still holds the record at his school. That's just insane to me. People don't understand, because we talk a lot about, or not necessarily we, but just like when I say we, I mean like the modern fan, because I'm a little bit younger than you are. The more modern fans, we talk about how much the game has improved athletically. That's great and all. Like, we can have that conversation, but you also need to acknowledge the Elgin Baylors of the world and the Connie Hawkins of the world, and the fact that Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain were not just great athletes for their time, they were great athletes for any time period ever. Like, these people were just marvels. Like, they happened to be amazing athletes, even for like 6'6" dudes in like, you know, 6'10" to 7-foot bodies. Like, you know, it just happens to be that way, but it just, you know, fell that way, where two of the greatest centers of all time are also two of the greatest athletes we have ever seen in the sport of basketball. And I think people kind of miss a lot of that point of it, because they kind of look at it and they're like, well, Bill Russell couldn't hold Joel Embiid's jockstrap in today's day and age because, you know, the game has gone, you know, people, I have buddies of mine who are like photoshopping like GIFs of like Bill Russell on like whatever players, again, posterized on by LeBron and stuff like that, being like, this is what would happen if Bill Russell played in LeBron's era. And I think that a lot of that is kind of the ESPN propaganda. Yeah. Because a lot of people are just, a lot of people almost have a 9 to 5 of, waking up, watching First Take, and then, going to work, potentially, looking into whatever, ESPN highlights were going on, and then watching the game at night. Like, people are genuinely just going on kind of like that little schedule, and it's really just feeding people into this hive mind of some of the greatest players of all time couldn't have possibly been from the 1960s, as if this was like, the 1800s and there was zero technology, and, the cavemen were existing and dinosaurs were around. And this was just like, right. The 1960s were a long time ago, don't get me wrong. And there have been a lot of advancements that have been made, and the game of basketball has improved dramatically, but not to the extent that, some of the modern fans are trying to put, as if like Bill Russell would be like a 12th man on some of these teams. Like, it's ridiculous, some of the things that are said, man.
Well, some of the stuff, like, we still literally have the data. We still have like measurements of these things. Wilt Chamberlain, not Wilt Chamberlain. We could talk about him too, but Bill Russell. Bill Russell at one point was the second highest leaper in the United States and the 7th highest leaper in the entire world. I'm not talking NBA. I'm talking leaper, period. We're talking about Olympic level, okay? Then, in the high jump competition that you're talking about, clears 6'9", okay? I'm sorry. I don't know how many centers could do that, modern day centers, all right? Like, we still have the data. Same thing with Wilt Chamberlain, who was also a freakish track athlete. And so for me, that's one of the things I've always found to be the most fascinating about this rivalry between those two greats is you're really talking about like lotto ticket type odds in order to have a 6'10 guy and a 7'1 guy both born in the same era, generally speaking, so that they can have that rivalry as two of the most athletic players to ever play this game at their size. Like, they are both in that conversation for the most athletic big men to ever live. And I don't think we've ever had an era, period, where you've had two guys at the top that were as athletic as them, at least from the center position, you know? And so, yeah, to me, that aspect is just lost because when it comes to this NBA fandom thing, there's levels to this. And when I talk about it, what I mean by there's levels is you've got your casual fan, you've got your NBA fan, and then you got like your freaking nerds like us that just obsess over the history and dissect it and want to learn about it genuinely for a love of the game. And a lot of people who are in my comment section, they're just like that because this is the kind of content they like. They respect those greats. Now, I'm not saying you have to rank these guys at a certain place to see it that way. I'm just saying it's passion about the game. I think a lot of the time when it comes to these arguments and these debates, it's not passion about basketball or the history or anything like that. It's bias to their eras because they just love their guys, their teams, their players, how their nostalgia is connected to it. And that's true of guys even from the 80s or 90s, that sort of thing. But if you really take the time and you really love the game and you learn about some of these greats, yeah, maybe they had certain disadvantages. Maybe they didn't have, the best private flights. They didn't have private flights. They didn't have, team trainers. They played in freaking Chuck Taylors, all these different aspects that kind of held them back. But every once in a while, it's just like the good Lord above is just like, we're just going to drop this freak right here. It would just be a freak in any era, and you had a lot of those in the 60s. And a lot of the time, the people who love to say, oh, this guy, he'd be chewed up and spit out because he's not athletic enough to play in this era, they can't tell you who the most athletic guys were from those previous eras. They can't, like, if you bring up Connie Hawkins, like flying through the air, Connie Hawkins with mitts the size of like Michael Jordan and Julius Erving, they don't know anything about this guy. You talk about the 80s, Magic, Bird, Dominique. Okay, how about Dr. Duncanstein, Daryl Griffith, who was like a freak flying through the air at 6'3" tall? Like, can you tell me about him? Nah, not really. Kenny Skywalker? Nah, not really. Terrence Stansbury? Nah, not really. Like, NBA history is rich, with just incredible athletes. And that's the thing that I think unfortunately is missed. And like you said, the media doesn't help with that. And the most frustrating part about that is sometimes I feel like they know the truth, but they don't care. You brought up Stephen A. Smith. He was in a debate one time. I even used it for a video related to Shaq and several different things. But he was in a debate talking about the greatest big men in NBA history. And when Wilt Chamberlain came up, he talked about against a bunch of 6 foot, nobodies basically. And I'm like, Stephen A.
Wilt. No.
I'm not giving it to Wilt.
No, you guys are crazy.
You're not giving it to Wilt.
No. You're not going to put Wilt Chamberlain, who averaged 50 points a game and scored 100 a game in 30 minutes.
Who was a foot taller than 99% of the league?
Yeah. The most dominant.
You know too much about the game. You know that's not true. I know that's not true. Because when I bring up guys like Walt Bellamy, 7 feet tall, Walter Dukes, like 7'1", Swade Halbrook, 7'3", Bill Russell. Okay, and the other thing you have to consider is because there was less teams, they're playing these guys like 12 times a season, So you only need like 4 or 5 before you've just covered like half the season. And so... yeah, that part's just frustrating, man. And so I think that's why it's nice to have channels like this and conversations like this where we could just, some people are biased, but some people just really don't know. Like, no, what you hear a lot, that's not actually true. The average height of the player in the 1960s was 6'5", and today's day, it's like 6'6". It's not that different,
You know what? I think because you talk about how a big thing, especially even with Michael Jordan, who granted I believe is one of the two greatest NBA players of all time, if not the best. Um, I think that a lot of it is the icon status. It's the stories, because the thing that makes the NBA different than just any other, basketball game that you go to watch, other than the fact that it's higher level, it's the stories that we can tell. It's the stories that we can pass on from generation to generation. I know how you spoke about how you used to watch a bunch of those old VHS tapes
Yeah.
of different, and I've always loved that angle you took it at, because that really resonated with me when I first started watching the channel. Because and why I think we're going to have a renaissance of the knowledge of the old game, more even than just the footage and the stats that we're getting nowadays, just with the rise of the internet. When I was a kid, I was watching the modern game. Don't get me wrong. I kind of became a fan around like the 2016. So the first NBA finals I ever watched, other than Michael Jordan, because my father grew up in the 90s. So like he was always like, oh, Michael Jordan, this, Michael Jordan's Jesus, Michael, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first NBA Finals I ever watched was, I remember I was in like some Thai restaurant, and they had a big TV, and it was Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals, and it was the fourth quarter. It was, so I watched the Kyrie Irving shot and the LeBron block and all of that, and the game.
What a way to be introduced to the NBA. That's crazy.
right. So I have nostalgia for those things, but as I got into the game, especially through a lot of like my high school years, other people were like, oh, granted, I watched like the Kawhi shot and everything in 2019, but they were all talking about, oh, modern game this, modern game that. I got really fascinated. I used to have this old CRT, TV in my bedroom, dude. I'd hook up. I had like a RGB to HDMI adapter, and I'd just hook up like my laptop all the time, and I'd watch, because there are these really nice playlists on YouTube. And this is what I'm talking about with footage being released on the internet now. I just go back and watch old Bill Russell games. Nice. I remember I have a really good memory of watching that final game, that I think it was Game 5, the eliminator of the 1972 NBA Finals, with Wilt Chamberlain going off against the Knicks and winning that Finals MVP. But those were the things, and I think that we have a lot of, and I brought this up in one of your live streams, one of your members' live streams once, that with a lot of this footage, for the people that are willing to look into it and are willing to delve into the rich lore that the NBA has, these people like Bill Russell, for me, became more like, because to some people it's just like, studying history, but I've delved into so much Bill Russell footage on YouTube that he's kind of become an icon for me. So like in that sense, I might even, I might even have some bias myself at this point, because I want to, be fair on both sides. But I think that with more access to the context and the footage now, and especially the restored footage, that there's all sorts of creators on YouTube who, I couldn't name them all possibly now, but just it's a godsend, the gift that they're giving.
Yeah, Fubas is a good one. That one's always putting out like 4K colorized footage and that sort of thing. You're starting to see a lot more of that, and it is really exciting.
Dude, Fubas, Wilt Chamberlain archive, all those, they're just, so good. And if I would definitely recommend anybody watching this right now to definitely go check those channels out, because if you 100%. Want any sort of context, you can listen to me and Johnny rant like two old grandmas about this topic as, long as you want. But if you really want the footage, it's there, and definitely, subscribe to those creators and give them 100%. Love. But I think that with more footage, more context, we're just going to see more respect. We're always going to have the modern day, because we're going to deal with at some point even the modern fans who are starting to call like Stephen Curry a plumber. Like, dude, when we get the 4-point line, they're going to be like, Steph Curry couldn't shoot in this era. He was playing against Walmart employees and all of this. Like, it's already happening. Exactly as you're saying. People are already saying this. People are already talking about, in the light of like Nikola Jokic and whatnot. And if he played, back in the 2010s or 2000s and whatnot, what would be happening? And I'm glad that a lot of LeBron fans are getting that exposure now.
That's what I was
because they can contextualize and think about like, oh, wait a second, like we were just giving these same argument points to all these MJ fans, but now the Jokic fandom is giving us all of this, and we're like, wait a second, like
yeah, I'll put it up on the screen, but like there's a couple recent examples where like Wemby's numbers in his rookie year compared to LeBron's numbers, they look better. And now LeBron fans who've been watching this guy play, some of them are even too young to have watched him play for all 23 seasons. Now they're having to contextualize what the NBA was like in 2004 and how it was one of the lowest scoring seasons since the NBA merger. They have to say things like that. It's like, yeah, that's what all them Jordan fans have been saying forever, you know? And now, even with Cooper Flagg, even Cooper Flagg's numbers are very comparable to LeBron's numbers in his rookie season. And so you're hearing a lot of that. And so, yeah, in a way, you know, history is just kind of repeating itself in that way. The internet has definitely, like, amplified it. You know, like now you see these narratives even like I think they grow even stronger. And, you know, now you get certain fan groups or, you know, people start saying the same sort of criticisms the same way over and over again. But in a way, it's just kind of repeating itself.
I do agree. I'm going to touch back on Bill Russell real quick before we get onto the last portion of our segment. I remember talking about, because just thinking about what makes Bill Russell so good, because we spoke about obviously like getting his players in rhythm and how he truly understood, you know, that you need to not only incorporate the other, you know, your other teammates into your game plan and your system and whatnot to truly win in a team-based environment. But just, you know, also getting those players in rhythm so they can hit the shots when it matters. Red Auerbach used to always say that, you know, the great players do it in the clutch. Like it all matters about who can do it when it really matters, when it gets in the clutch. So definitely the rhythm part, but also something about Bill Russell that does get mentioned, but not as much as I think it should, is the psyche part. It's the mental warfare that he played. I know you touched on it in terms of his mental, you know, kind of gameplay a little bit, kind of like how we see with like a Kobe Bryant or a Michael Jordan, right? Like a Mamba mentality. I definitely see that with Bill Russell too. You could just talk about how, I mean, I remember I was watching some sort of interview with him where he'd say that he wouldn't even necessarily block all the shots. Sometimes he just like, you know, make sure that he's stepping really heavy behind the player so they'd think that he's going to block it. Because if they think that he's going to block it, and he's got to block a few of those shots to really, you know, put that, you know, thought into their heads. But if they think he's going to block it, they're going to be thinking about that the whole time instead of, you know, finishing that layup or, you know, making that, you know, correct pass, which we saw the Celtics were really good at forcing turnovers. And a lot of that, in my opinion, was kind of the psyche of the Celtics, that people kind of just saw the Celtics as like, you know, it was like larger than life. It was something that was like, you know, an unconquerable mountain. And, you know, other than Bob Pettit's Hawks beating them when Bill Russell was injured, and obviously Wilt assembling an absolute monsters team in 1967 to take them down. But even the year after that, I mean, I know Billy Cunningham was injured, but the Celtics came back from 3-1. People don't talk about that series enough, how the Celtics came back from 3-1 against the team that just beat them the previous year. And then they win in 68. And then in 69, I think the ultimate story. And I'm not great with names, so I'm actually going to piggyback this to you to tell the story of Bill Russell and that Game 7 in 1967 and what he, like that whole thing there, because I know that you could tell the story probably better than I could.
Yeah, so you're talking about 69, right, in his final year?
Did I say 67 or 69?
You said 67, yeah. That was
the 69, the 69, Game 7.
So 1969, Game 7, there's really a story to that whole season. And basically what happens is that was the first year where the Lakers got Wilt Chamberlain. So now they have Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor. 3 guys who are all capable of leading their own teams deep into NBA playoffs. Now you've got this 3-headed monster. And as far as I could tell, I still believe this to be the case. That was the first team that was commonly referred to as a super team, which I think also sets the foundation of what a super team is, which is a 3-headed superstar monster. You know, it could be more than that. You could have a deep, you know, supporting cast, that sort of thing. But that's the way I've always understood it. A 3-headed superstar monster where each guy can lead his own team. And so the Lakers now, who have been under the foot of the Celtics throughout the 1960s, suddenly they're seen as the favorites because people have been noticing, Yeah, although the Celtics, won in 68, and although they won those years before that, they did lose to the 76ers were the ones who won the championship in 67. They seem like they're getting a little bit long in the tooth. They're getting towards the end of the run. Now the Lakers are seen as the title favorites. I mean, why would they not be? You got Wilt, you got Elgin Baylor, you got Jerry West. They came close many times separately, And so it gets to the NBA Finals, and it's Lakers and Celtics. It's exactly what you'd expect. Going into Game 7, okay, and a lot of people didn't expect it to get to Game 7, but going into Game 7, they're in Los Angeles, and the Lakers are so confident that they're going to end up winning this thing, especially the owner, Jack Kent Cooke. Okay, so before Jerry Buss, you had Jack Kent Cooke. He was so confident that his team was going to win the championship that they hung up balloons up in the rafters that said on the balloons, "Congratulations to the 1969 champions, the Los Angeles Lakers." That pissed Bill Russell off. And he told his, there was witnesses to this, that he told his teammates pregame when he saw those, because he didn't see him until he walked out there. Now he'd probably know from social media ahead of time and that sort of thing. It'd be this huge talking point. He didn't notice them until they got out onto the court. And he says, those effing balloons are staying up there. Okay? Bill Russell's a defensive monster. Not his greatest game statistically, but again, you could watch large portions of the game at the very minimum. The entirety of the fourth quarter's on there, and Bill Russell's getting incredible stop after incredible stop, while Wilt Chamberlain goes out because he's got an injured knee, so he's not available. But who is available? Bill Russell. They take home the NBA championship. He sails off into the sunset with his 11th title on a year where they were underdogs. Because what did they win? Something like 48 games that year? They were not expected to win yet again, but they beat the super team. It was kind of Dirk Nowitzki, before Dirk Nowitzki with the 2011 Mavericks. If Dirk Nowitzki had won 10 championships before that. That's the way Bill Russell was sailing off into the sunset. So yeah, that's just one of the craziest stories in NBA history to me, and how anybody ever considered, Bill Russell, you can't ever consider him an underdog. You just can't, because you've seen him do it time and time again. You kind of just have to assume he's going to find a way. One thing I wanted to say, to piggyback off of that, is now in these conversations, people love hypotheticals. And there's this phrase now that you'll hear here a lot. This guy's undefeated in hypotheticals. Michael Jordan's got him. LeBron's got him. Well, what if LeBron didn't have to go against the super team Golden State Warriors? Well, what if Michael Jordan didn't retire to play baseball? They win 8 straight. Everybody's got those, You know who else has got him, but they never ever talk about it? Bill Russell. Okay? Not that he necessarily needs it with his resume, but you want to look at the 1958 NBA Finals, okay? Bill Russell was 11-1 in the NBA Finals. That one loss, he was injured, okay? He only played in 4 out of the 6 games in those finals. And so, yeah, and it still goes to a 6-game series. They're probably winning the championship in that scenario if he doesn't get hurt. And now you're looking at a 12-0 resume for Bill Russell, which is, just absurd. And so, yeah, we could go on and on singing the praises for this guy, and that's why I don't have a problem with you having him as your GOAT. I honestly don't. The biggest complaint and I think the only criticism that people have really got is either probably one of two. You either just don't respect the 60s, or you just say that he wasn't good enough offensively. Maybe as a scorer, but again, we talked about, just to start this video, how important he was to their offensive success.
Well, I think it's funny. I like that because I know that there's a lot of people that watch your channel, and when they see your list about, because that's the thing, is a lot of people just when they're formulating their own NBA GOAT lists, they're kind of at some point, they're kind of afraid to go against the consensus. And what's building that consensus? The media. So when the media has certain what they paint as objectives, like Michael Jordan, LeBron, and Kareem being the top 3, and that's just undisputable. If you dispute that, then you're just, you're arguing that the world is flat. So a lot of people, when they're making their lists, are scared to go against the consensus. So
100%.
because they're usually showing their list to other people and they don't want the backlash. When you have people that are willing to, especially people on a prominent platform, or say to some extent prominent platform, that are willing to say things like Bill Russell over LeBron James all time. You tell that to any LeBron fan, and you might as well be like running over their dog. Like it's one of those things where like you just can't say that. That's like it's just as big of a fact as anything that LeBron is top 2 all time, and if you don't believe that, then you just don't know ball. And when you have people that are willing to go there and are willing to actually, these educated individuals like you or me, like you said, the nerds of the game that are willing to not only say this is the opinion of like you or me, but like give the reasons why and actually be able to explain it in depth. It opens up the the playing field for people to just conceptualize their GOAT list and actually be able to state it as they actually feel, not kind of how they feel and kind of intertwined with what ESPN and their friends are telling them, but like actually like when they study the game, when they watch the game, because that's the fun part. It's all subjective. Like there's some people like if you tell me that LaMelo Ball is greater than Bill Russell, I'm probably going to laugh. But like to some extent, when you're talking about the greatest players of all time, you're grasping at straws. To some extent, it's going to differ, or it should differ. And it doesn't differ enough, in my opinion, because in reality, it probably should differ more, but there's kind of that fear in place. And I think that having creators such as yourself be able to put out a list, even if you're getting all sorts of hate comments for putting Larry Bird at 2, which obviously I don't agree with, but but he's such an amazing player, and I would never hate on that take. That's a completely valid take. But people who are willing to put that out in the basketball universe a little bit on the internet, it really does inspire people.
Yeah, for sure. I think another way of saying it would be like you're giving an invitation to be a free thinker. Because one of the things that I've seen, and it's a perfect example of that, and it just drove me crazy, is I've seen the top 10 greatest players of all time according to ChatGPT or like Grok, just like AI algorithms. And it's the most generic, safe top 10 list you've ever seen because it's kind of just polling the consensus. That's how AI works. It's basically stealing information from a bunch of different places to create either a video or create a list. It's just taking a bunch of things that it knows from the internet. If there's nothing on the internet related to that subject, it's going to have nothing to offer you, but it's the internet. So it's got a lot to pull from. And so it kind of just always gives, like you said, Michael Jordan 1, LeBron 2, Kareem 3. It's the same like freaking algorithmic top 10 that you'd always see. And it really makes you question, like, do you really? Like, do you all really believe the same thing? Or are you just scared to say, like, to have your hot takes out there? Because again, there's so many variables to this. Like Kareem, I could talk about Kareem at length. I could make a case for him or make a case against him. Like, his resume is ridiculous. 6 championships. 6 MVPs. That's more than Michael Jordan. The most unstoppable shot in NBA history with the skyhook. Okay, but like the same way you criticize Kobe Bryant for winning 3 rings with Shaquille O'Neal, he won 5 of his 6 with Magic Johnson. And most of those, Magic was the engine of that offense. He was the identity of that offense. I'm not saying he needs to be lower. I'm not saying he needs to be higher one way or another. I'm saying there's nuance to this. Like, make your take, have your bold take. And that's why I respect a guy like Mammon saying, Bill Russell's my GOAT with conviction. Because I know you mean it. I know you believe it, and I know you have your reasons for believing it. But a lot of times you just hear people come up with these lists or why this guy's above or below, and they either don't know how to back it up or they back it up with complete, utter misinformation. And for me, I see that more with Wilt Chamberlain than anybody else. If I was to ask, what are your 5 reasons why Wilt Chamberlain is not like a top 10 player in NBA history? Because I'm seeing a gross amount of people leaving him out of the top 10. Why is he not in your top 10? Like your 5 reasons. At least 4 of them, every single time, are based in stuff that's just not true. Like literally the playing guys who are too short. The information's on Basketball Reference. You can go see how tall these players were and just average it out. It's not that hard. And so anyway, that's what gives me my passion for this job and for like podcasts like this, is that we can have these type of conversations about stuff that if everybody knew it, would it be as interesting? You know, if we were just saying and repeating information here that just like everybody talks about is all common knowledge. No, but like within the rich history of the NBA, there's a treasure trove that's like barely dug into because they'd rather just dismiss it in order to, you know, lift up their favorite player. And to me, that part is sad. I'm like, you guys are the ones who are missing out when you do that kind of thing, because you're dismissing so many great years of beautiful games, beautiful competition, amazing stories. And anyway, so that's what makes, you know, get-togethers like this fun.
So the ultimate question that we kind of brought up earlier is just like, when you're kind of thinking about the 60s Celtics, when you think about the 90s Bulls, we all have a greatest Bulls team. We have the 96 Bulls, you know, 72-10, and there's really not much debate outside of that, just because, you know, objectively, like, you know, Dennis Rodman's on that team and their record's so great. With the Warriors, you know, 2016-17 Warriors, with the Lakers of the 2000s, 01 Lakers. With the Celtics, it's a little bit different because they were succeeding for so long, and there's a lot of nuance to this, you know, question. So I'm going to ask you, to you, Johnny Arnett, what is the singular greatest team from the Bill Russell Celtics dynasty?
So I recently made a video on this, so I was thinking about it. It's tough, but for me, you're looking at probably in the middle of like their 8 straight championships. Middle-ish, actually. Maybe I guess it is a little bit towards the tail end of it. I like the 63-64 team. And the reason why I'm going with the 63-64 team is because in most of their playoff runs, there was actually some pretty tough series to get past. Lots of game 7s. You just hear a team wins 8 straight championships, 11 championships in a row. They were just overpowered, you know, and they just ran over the competition because they had way more talent, and every game was a 25-point blowout. No, that wasn't the case. Like, there was a lot of close calls, and to me, that even like adds to Bill Russell's, you know, greatness, because that contextualizes like how it was this close, but they found a way to win. And so for me, the 64 team, they're one of the few exceptions where that wasn't the case. It was pretty easy. Okay, they went 59-21 throughout the regular season. And then when you get to the playoffs, they go up against the Cincinnati Royals with Oscar Robertson, beat them 4-1. They go up against, you know, the San Francisco Warriors, they beat them 4-1. And, you know, you only had 2 rounds in the playoffs at that time because there was less teams. And so they're cruised through the regular season, you cruise to the playoffs. Then you look at the overlap between like the greats on their team. Bill Russell's 29 years old. John Havlicek's becoming that guy now, where he's 23 years old. And Bill Russell was 3rd in the MVP voting that year. You got Sam Jones doing his thing, being among the leading scorers in the league. Tom Sanders, Tommy Heinsohn. Like, they're still ridiculously loaded. When you look at that team, like that team specifically, what's your criticism? Like, do you have one? They dominated at every level. All their guys were like, you know, peak age for winning. And so for me, the 64 team is my choice. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the 64 team especially is the greatest Celtics defensive team of all time.
Sure.
So just the way that they were able, because this was also the team that beat Wilt Chamberlain in the NBA Finals. Mm-hmm. So they were able to put up that, you know, defensive stop and really shut down that team, you know, even hold Wilt lower to, you know, than his usual standards in that series, even though he played an amazing series. So I definitely see the case there. I definitely think it's somewhere between 1962 and 1965. I think somewhere in that window is probably where you go. I've, you know, kind of had to ponder on this over my time. The popular opinion is 64-65 because that's the, you know, Bill Russell had an amazing final series. He was kind of still at the peak of his powers. Sam Jones was just ridiculous as a scorer, probably the best scorer that dynasty had ever seen at that point. And And then obviously you had 1962 with how those NBA finals went. And, Elgin Baylor was doing all this stuff. But then, Bill Russell came up in the clutch. And 1962, just as an NBA season in general, probably has
Ridiculous.
the most storylines maybe of any season ever in the sport of NBA. To me, my take would be the 1962-1963 Boston Celtics.
Wow, interesting.
Okay. And I would say that, part of it is a cop-out answer because I want to be able to just through conversation and through debate, be able to stack up the roster of this team to other teams all time. It was the 1 year that Bob Cousy and John Havlicek's careers,
that's true,
crossed over. And I think that when you're looking, that team still had Frank Ramsey, Sam Jones, and Tom Heinsohn were the leading scorers. And I've watched a bunch of footage, obviously, of that year. There's like the famous final game of the 1963 NBA Finals where Bob Cousy hurts his ankle, but then he comes back and, he dribbles out the clock, throws the ball in the air, and that's kind of like the end of his career, his storybook career.
Right.
And I think that just having still that core team together, and honestly, the struggles they had to go through. I just want to say this for the viewers out there. Oscar Robertson played out of his mind in that Royal Celtics series in the 1963 playoffs. That was a series, when we think about the biggest carry jobs, what AI was doing with the Sixers, Oscar Robertson was ridiculous. And it took a Herculean effort, and it really took a collective effort just to take down Oscar Robertson. And you get past that, and then they faced the Lakers that they were playing in, obviously, a lot of those NBA finals. But the previous one where Elgin Baylor was going off, they did really well in that series, too. It did go more games, not more than the 1962 series, but just more games than maybe some of their other final series.
Right.
But I think
division finals with the Royals was 7, and then NBA finals with the Lakers was 6. But you're raising up good points. You could knock them for that, but the competition's ridiculous, Oh, yeah, it was so good. And I think that just when you're taking a team and you're hypothetically matching them up against other teams, I think that the team where you have, Cousy bringing the ball up, you have Sam Jones, Tom Heinsohn, Satch Sanders, which is an extremely underrated player of the Celtics dynasty, just how many, defensive options they had. I think at that point, I'm not certain they might have. I'm pretty sure they had Casey Jones. John Havlicek was the sixth man. I think that when you just look at that roster, and that's the thing is you really grasp at straws when you're trying to pick a greatest Celtics team from that era. But that's just, to me, when I watch the games and when I look at the roster and just it's less exactly how it was executed in that season because there's so much in-season context for any sort of team success. But when you just look at that roster, and it might be a cop-out, but when we talk about Bill Russell's two best teammates, Bob Cousy and Hondo, are probably the two picks there. Yeah,
they're both on the same team.
Sam Jones is barely on the outside looking in, but I think I would agree. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Sam Jones, extremely underrated scorer and a huge part of the mid 60s portion of that dynasty. But, you've got Sam Jones on that team. You've got Tom Heinsohn at the peak of his powers, too. He's over here. I think I know Sam Jones and Tom Heinsohn kind of switched out. One of them was the leading scorer during the regular season. One of them was the leading scorer during the postseason. But they were both, near the peak or near or at the peak of their powers scoring wise. Bob Cousy was still an amazing distributor. Go watch any sort of film of Bob Cousy out there. His passing was immaculate.
Sure.
And then you had, Hondo coming off the bench, which he was doing really well come postseason time. And then Bill Russell's at the peak of his powers. I don't know, man, but let me
support your point a little bit. Let me support your point a little bit, actually, because just even consider this. 1963, 28-year-old Bill Russell, he's the MVP of the league, okay? But Bob Cousy is 8th in the MVP voting. And then freaking John Havlicek is 10th. And so within their team, they have 3 guys in the top 10 of the MVP voting, which is just incredible. Another fun fact about these 1963 Celtics, and this isn't necessarily a criticism. It kind of just depends on how you want to look at it. They had the best defensive rating in the entire league, which was basically every year for the Celtics. And they won the championship while despite having the worst offensive rating in the entire league, which I think is hilarious. Like, how great does your defense have to be if you're just even in the bottom couple spots, among defenses in the league, but you're still, winning the championship in the fashion that they're doing it? Yeah, and I think that's one thing. You mentioned some of the defenders they have. Yeah, those guys, it always makes it seem like it was just Bill Russell locking things down. No, man, they had a squad. Like, they absolutely had a squad. And so, no, I like your point. I tend to lean a little bit heavier to, like, teams that made it look uber convincing in the postseason, but bringing up like the guys they were playing against, because even if 62, you were talking about, Elgin Baylor having a 61-point game in the NBA Finals, which is still the highest scoring finals game in NBA history. Like, you can't forget that context too. And in 63, Oscar Robertson averaging 34, like 13 and 9 in the postseason. Like, yeah, it's no wonder that series went 6 games, And so no, I like your choice. I'm sticking with my 64 team, but I like your argument for 63 for sure.